one of the most disturbing trends in American political life lately is the ascendance of hate speech and hate groups, and I think we all have a strong sense of where that comes from and who is encouraging that. But here to talk to us about that now is Mark Potok. Mark has been on the show before. He is a senior fellow with the Southern Poverty Law Center. He is a former journalist, and he is here to talk about a new report from the SPLC, which shows that hate groups, the number of hate groups in this country continues to rise. So first of all, Mark, thanks for coming back on the program.
Well, thanks so much for having me. A real pleasure to be here.
And tell us a little bit about the report you recently put out. What were your overall findings? It's a census of hate groups. What have you found?
Well, what we found was that for the second year in a row, the numbers have gone up again. Not very much. They went up by about 3%. So we've got over 900 of these groups right now. I think really the important thing to know about that is that we are within 100 groups, almost precisely, of our all-time high count, which came in 2011. So there are a very large number of hate groups out there. They are actually growing at this point. And perhaps what is important to say is that the groups are energized in a really remarkable way as a result of the Trump campaign and, of course, the Trump victory in the election. Another thing I think I should say about the numbers is that at this point, I think the numbers, the counts we've been doing annually for almost 30 years now, in this case, I think, and increasingly understates the size of the radical right. I say that because more and more we are seeing people involved in the white supremacist movement, involved in the radical right, who actually never join a hate group, who in fact often have no contact at all with hate groups other than reading their materials on websites. So I think, a very good example of that is Dylan Roof, the author of the Charleston, South Carolina massacre in 2015. Roof was a guy who never joined a group, who had no contact at all that is known with any group, who had no real correspondence with people in the movement, who simply lurked on the internet reading about the alleged genocide of white people by black people in this country, and one day decided that people had to die.
Now, so this is an example.
Kind of top line finding out of the report was that while most groups grew by a fairly small amount, anti-Muslim hate groups grew spectacularly.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you for a second
about
that.
From 34 groups to 101 groups in a single year.
And I wanted to talk to you about that. Actually, you raise a number of important issues, including the fact that a lot of people don't join any groups at all. They are, like Dylan Roof, to use the term that's often used for external terrorism, they are self-radicalized on the internet. But let's talk a little bit. The increase you saw year over year from last year is almost entirely I think, entirely explainable by the increase in anti-Muslim hate groups, and that seems to be directly tied to some of the rhetoric that's been used by Donald Trump and Steve Bannon and a couple others, trying to blame an entire religion for the actions of a few. Is that a fair statement, or is that me projecting more into the data than you see?
No, I think it's a totally fair statement. I think that's what's going on. I think to try and be honest about it, we can't say it's 100% the fault of Trump or Bannon or Trump's campaign, although it's very largely their responsibility. To some extent, people are reacting out there to real life atrocities from anti-Muslim groups like the Islamic State and so on. But I do think that most of this energy is coming from the Trump campaign. It's worth remembering some of the things he's done, talking about, Muslims aren't good enough to be in this country, the idea that we have to create a Muslim registry to keep track of these dangerous people, his proposal that we surveil mosques and Islamic community centers and so on. And that has simply just gone on and on and on. And of course, it's not only Trump. Trump has brought into the White House people like Stephen Bannon, people like Stephen Miller, people like Kellyanne Conway, all of whom have very strong connections to the world of anti-Muslim extremism. It's maybe worth remembering that I'm sure most of our listeners remember that Trump at one point retweeted a claim and a completely false claim that 25% of American Muslims support violent jihad against their fellow non-Muslim Americans. As it turns out, that was a completely bogus, quote-unquote, poll, a so-called opt-in poll. And in fact, it came from Kellyanne Conway as a consultant.
I actually didn't know that
bogus
poll
which Trump later used.
I actually didn't know that poll came from Kellyanne Conway, but I think it's important for our listeners to understand that there are different gradients of white nationalism and white extremism being described here. You are identifying a series of hate groups and a rise in the growth of hate groups, but that, in effect, is one indicator, I think, one measure. The other thing that you're talking about is the level of intensity. You use the term energized to describe them, and this level, and the third is the individuals who never join a group but are radicalized online. So let's talk about that for a second. I think a lot of people felt that when Donald Trump became president that he might moderate his rhetoric the way other politicians have done. But if anything, we seem to be seeing an increase in that sort of rhetoric, and he did attempt to create what's, I think, being accurately described as a Muslim travel ban to visitors from 7 countries. Do you see, are you concerned that we're going to see, in addition to an uptick in the number of hate groups, are you concerned that they are also giving energy to individual people who might be predisposed to violence?
I don't think, again, that there's any question about it. We don't have the FBI National Hate Crime Statistics for 2016 yet, and we won't until next November. But we do have the 2015 reports, and of course 2015 encompasses the first 6 months of Trump's campaign when he made all the statements that we've already discussed. And in fact, in 2015, when you look at the FBI numbers, most categories of hate crimes went up slightly, 2, 3, 4%. Anti-Muslim hate crimes in 2015 went up by 67%. I think that is in very large part attributable to the Trump campaign and its various statements. I think it's worth saying, just in January alone of this year, we saw 3 major mosque arsons, mosques burned to the ground, 2 of them in Texas. We have also seen a series of plots aimed at Muslims. Late last fall, there was a plot in a place called Garden City, Kansas, to murder something like 120 Somali immigrants, who are, of course, Muslims. This was a group that, these 3 men who were part of an anti-government group, but who later spun off and created their own group, allegedly, called the Crusaders, and decided they were going to pack 4 vehicles full of explosives, send these 4 vehicles to the 4 corners of a large housing complex where these Somali immigrants lived, and set them all off with cell phone detonators. And there are other plots like that have come to light in the last couple of years. There was yet another one by a Klansman in New York State who intended to murder hundreds, if not thousands, of Muslims at a mosque by using an X-ray weapon, which in fact he had begun to build. So it's bad out there all around. We have seen in the wake of the Trump elections attacks on virtually every minority out there at higher levels, or certainly anecdotally at higher levels than in the past, but no one has gotten it worse than Muslims.
And at the same time that we're seeing this uptick in white right-wing extremist violence, President Trump has indicated that he wants to redirect the program that had been entitled Countering Violent Extremism, CVE, I believe was the and he wants to redirect that to countering Islamic extremism, which seems to suggest, in my mind, but I want your thoughts on this, Mark Potok, it seems to send a signal to white violent radicals that it's open season, that to me, we're not going to be looking at you anymore, even as these horrifying incidents or attempted incidents increase in number, that's okay, we're not paying attention to you anymore. I find that very disturbing. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you 100%. I think that is absolutely what the message was. It was a way of saying, as Trump has said in so many different ways up to now, that we're really not too concerned about the radical right. I mean, I think that Trump, from the very first moment of his campaign, his opening speech describing Mexican immigrants as rapists and drug dealers, Trump has essentially been playing a game of footsie with the radical right. He has at every turn avoided strenuously denouncing them. He lied baldly at one point in saying he could not disavow David Duke, the former Klan leader, because he had no idea who he was. As I say, that was a complete falsehood. In fact, Trump in the year 2000 wrote an op-ed in the New York Times explaining why he was not going to run, after all, for president on the Reform Party ticket, because David Duke, a former Klansman and neo-Nazi and so on, was involved in the Reform Party. So I just think this has been a game that he has played. At every turn, he has avoided criticizing the radical right. I mean, the latest, of course, is his extreme reluctance to denounce anti-Semitism in the wake of a really remarkable series of 70-some bomb threats directed at Jewish community centers. Trump, on two different occasions, two different press conferences, one in Washington, one in Israel, was asked about this. And in one case, he yelled at the reporter in the White House press conference. And in the other, even more remarkably, in Israel, he was asked this question and launched into a spiel about how many electoral votes he had won and how popular he was and so on. So in other words, he didn't deal with it at all. Ultimately, cornered by massive numbers of reporters, he read an unbelievably lukewarm statement about anti-Semitism being terribly naughty, and he did not approve of it. But it was pretty obvious that he had a metaphorical gun to his head and would really have rather not said anything at all. So he's playing a game.
At the same time, Mark Potok, there was a lot of talk. You've talked, we've really described a guy who's playing footsie with a radical movement, and I wonder your thought. A lot of people thought that he was playing the same kind of game with the extremist right, white nationalist right, when he refused to reference Jews specifically on Holocaust Remembrance Day. That seemed like a conspicuous omission, and my reaction was any thought that might have been accidental was dispelled by the sloppiness and reluctance, seeming reluctance to correct the oversight. So
it wasn't an oversight, as they said themselves. They were completely behind it, and so it's absolutely so. And, some people who haven't thought about this very deeply may think, well, lots of people died in the Second World War and so on. It wasn't only Jews who were victims. And that is true. But when we speak of the Holocaust, we are speaking specifically of the murder of 5 or 6 million Jews by the Nazis, a true attempt at genocide. So, it was Holocaust Remembrance Day. It wasn't World War II Remembrance Day. And let's not forget that Trump has played this game in other ways. During the campaign, he at one point retweeted a really unbelievable tweet, and it was an image of a Star of David, a Jewish star, with an image of Hillary Clinton sitting on piles and piles of money. I don't think anyone could misunderstand what that suggested. I mean, Trump later claimed that, the star was a sheriff's star, which, of course, is a 5-pointed, not a 6-pointed star. But it seemed very obviously bogus. Let's also remember that virtually the last speech that Trump gave in his campaign was one in which he denounced global elites and international bankers. Right. Now, who's to say what Donald Trump thought he was talking about, but that is certainly a signal to everyone on the anti-Semitic right, the neo-Nazi right. He's talking about Jews, the alleged international Jewish conspiracy, the Jews who allegedly run the world, and so on. So, all of these things sort of beg the question of, well, what does Donald Trump personally think? And I would say that really it hardly matters. Right. Is Donald Trump personally an anti-Semite, despite the fact that his son-in-law is an Orthodox Jew and his daughter has converted to Judaism? Well, it really doesn't matter what he thinks. The fact is that he is saying things that give comfort and encouragement in a very big way to people who really are anti-Semites and, in fact, are National Socialists.
And who may kill for their beliefs. And the bottom line is, if you unleash demons, I guess it doesn't matter if you're a demon yourself. The demons are out there. And so, Mark Potok, thanks for tracking this frightening topic. Senior fellow with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Thanks for all the great work you do there, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.